welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today we're going deep on something that I know a lot of folks are grappling with, and that is getting a handle on cloud computing costs,
Absolutely.
specifically in Azure. And you all have sent us a ton of great material to kind of wade through. We've got stuff about, connecting to the raw cost data, some best practices and design considerations, all the way to really comprehensive checklists for optimizing your spending. So our mission today is really to try to distill this down to those real key insights, cut through some of the complexity and really give you the tools to take control of your Azure investment without feeling like you need an advanced degree in cloud economics.
I like that. It's really about moving from a reactive approach where, you just get that bill at the end of the month. You're kind of like, oh, wow, to actually being proactive and understanding and making decisions based on where your money's going and where it makes the most sense.
Yeah, I like that analogy of it's not just about knowing that driving your car costs money. It's about knowing how much each mile costs you and how to make those miles more efficient.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's jump right in. So one of the first things that jumped out at me from the materials you sent is the Microsoft Cost Management Connector for Power BI Desktop. This seems like a really powerful tool, especially for folks with a direct Microsoft customer agreement, an enterprise agreement, or a Microsoft partner agreement. So what makes this such a game changer for someone trying to understand their Azure spend?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's really about taking that raw data and turning it into something visual, something you can interact with.
Right.
And really, slice and dice your data, right? So rather than just endless spreadsheets, you can create, custom reports and dashboards that reveal exactly, where your Azure dollars are going. So you can look at, trends over time, drill down into specific services or resource groups, and really get a handle on, what's driving your costs. It's about moving from a data deluge to actionable insights.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So what if you have a different type of agreement, one that's not directly supported by this connector? Are you just out of luck?
Not at all. For unsupported agreements, you've still got the export feature, which lets you, pull your cost data out to a storage location of your choice.
Okay.
And then connect Power BI to that. It's a couple extra steps, but it gets you to that same, visual, interactive, powerful analysis that we're talking about.
Got it. So the connector uses OAuth 2.0 for authentication, which might sound a little jargony. Can you break that down for us in plain English? Why should our listeners care about this?
So essentially, OAuth 2.0 is just a really secure way for Power BI to ask Azure for permission to see your cost data, right?
Right.
But without you having to give Power BI your direct Azure login credentials every single time. It's like, think of it like using your fingerprint to unlock your phone. It's secure, and you don't have to keep entering your passcode.
Right.
The important thing is to remember, you need the right level of access in Azure to make this work.
Okay.
So for EAs, that's Enterprise Administrator. For MCAs, it's either billing account or billing profile permissions.
Makes sense. So secure access and making sure the right people have the right digital keys, so to speak. Now, there's a mention of a limit for this connector. It can only support up to an estimated $5 million of raw cost details. Is this a practical limit that most people are going to run into, or is it more of a theoretical thing?
Well, it's something to be aware of. For those who are dealing with a lot of data, if you're running some seriously large Azure environments, you're generating a lot of data, it could be a factor. And if you regularly exceed that, then the export functionality that we talk about, or even potentially aggregating your data within Azure before you pull it into Power BI, might be the way to go. It's about choosing the right approach based on the scale of your data.
Got it. So how do we actually get started with this connector in Power BI Desktop?
All right, so you go to Power BI Desktop, and then you want to go under Get Data. You're going to see a bunch of different options, but you're looking for Microsoft Cost Management.
Okay.
It should be under the Azure category. So select that, and then you'll see a dialog line box pop up that says Choose Scope. And this is where it's going to kind of branch a little bit depending on whether you have a Microsoft customer agreement or an enterprise agreement. So for MCAs, you'll generally pick Manually Input Scope, while for EAs, it's usually going to be Enrollment Number.
Okay.
So let's start with connecting to a Microsoft Customer Agreement, or MCA. Now with MCAs, you can connect to either a billing account or a billing profile. So what's the difference there, and how do you actually connect to each?
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's break those two down.
Sure. So your billing account is like your top-level agreement with Microsoft, right?
Okay.
And then billing profiles are kind of like sub-accounts underneath that, where you might have, say, specific departments or projects that have their own invoices and payment methods.
Got it. So like departments or projects within your organization, you might have separate billing profiles for those.
Exactly. So to connect at the billing account level, you're going to need to grab your billing account ID from the Azure portal. You can find it under Cost Management plus Billing. Then you go to Billing Profile on the left-hand menu and then Properties. Once you have that ID, you're going to go back to Power BI, and using the Manually Input Scope option, you're going to construct a connection string that looks like this: Providers Microsoft. Billing account. Just replace that bracket in part with your actual ID.
All right, so it's like a little template you're filling in with your own ID. Now, you mentioned there's another way to do this using enrollment number.
Yeah, that's right. You can also just select enrollment number as your choose scope, and then just paste that same billing account ID into the Scope Idea Hire field. It basically achieves the same thing. You'll also notice a field there for number of months. This is where you control how much historical data you want to pull in. And here's a pro tip. If you need a date range shorter than a month, just set the number of months to 0, and you can specify the exact start date and end date that you need.
Oh, that's handy for a really targeted analysis. Okay, so what about connecting to a billing profile within an MCA? When would you do that?
You'd connect to a specific billing profile if you want to analyze costs for, say, a particular project or department that's being managed under its own billing profile. To do that, you'll need both the billing profile ID and the overarching billing account ID. You can find these in the same Properties section of your billing profile in the Azure portal. The connection string looks a little different here. Providers Microsoft, billing accounts, relevant to billing account. And just like before, you have that number of months field to define your data range.
Makes sense. So now let's switch gears and talk about enterprise agreements, or EAs, which have been around for quite a while. How does connecting with an EA work?
So for an EA, you start in the Azure portal, go to Cost Management plus Billing, and then select your billing account. On the Overview blade, you'll see the billing account ID. Copy that. Then back in Power BI Desktop, when you get to Choose Scope, you're going to select Enrollment Number and paste that ID into the Scope Identifier field. The number of month field is there too, like before. And just a key thing to remember with EAs, you'll need to authenticate using an Enterprise Administrator account.
Okay, so different authentication depending on your agreement type. Now, once you've made that connection, you're greeted with the Navigator window in Power BI, which has a bunch of different data tables. Can you give us a rundown of what kind of information each of these tables provides?
Sure. So the tables will vary slightly depending on whether you have an EA or an MCA. For EA accounts, you'll see a balance summary table. That's for seeing your Azure prepayment balance and usage. MCA accounts will have tables like billing events, which track all the billing-related things that happen, charges for a breakdown of your costs, and credit lots to keep track of any credits you might have.
Okay.
Now, the tables that are common to both EAs and MCAs include budgets for tracking your spending against your limits, price sheets for seeing the rates you're being charged, and then several tables related to reserved instances or RIs. One thing to note, the RI charges table is actually being deprecated, so you should really be using RI transactions for your analysis.
Okay, good to know.
You've also got RI recommendations shared and RI recommendations single, which can help you identify potential savings from buying RIs. And then RI usage details and RI usage summary help you understand how you're actually utilizing your existing RIs. Finally, there's the usage details table, which gives you a really granular view of your consumed resources and their estimated charges. There's also a usage details annotated table that helps you see your spending more consistently by spreading the cost of things like RIs over their term.
So it's like different lenses to look at your cost data?
Exactly. Each table gives you a slightly different perspective. And with Power BI, you can load multiple tables and even join them together to create super insightful reports that answer your specific questions.
Right. So for example, if you want to see your day-to-day spending, you'd probably look at usage details. But if you want to see if you're making the most of your Azure prepayment, you'd look at balance summary on an EA.
Exactly.
And once you choose a table, you get a preview of the data, and then you can load one or more of these tables into Power BI Desktop. Makes sense. And then all those fields are available in the Fields pane on the right. Now, the documentation mentions another important limitation to keep in mind. Power BI can't handle data row requests of more than 1 million rows. What happens if you have more data than that?
Well, if you're dealing with really huge Azure environments and you're hitting that million-row limit, the direct connector might not be the best option. Instead, you can use the export feature in Azure Cost Management to pull your data out, maybe breaking it up into smaller chunks, and then connecting Power BI to those exported files. This lets you work with the data even if it's larger than that million-row limit.
Got it. So it's a good workaround. Now, there's also a tip about transforming the usage details table to work better with tags. It mentions creating a custom column in Power Query Editor to put the tags into a JSON format. That sounds a little more advanced, but what's the benefit for those who are really into tagging their resources?
It is a more advanced thing, but it's super helpful for those who use tags extensively, because the raw usage details data just gives you all the tags in one big string, which isn't that useful for analysis. But by transforming it into JSON in Power BI, you can easily split those tags out and analyze your costs based on each individual tag, which gives you much more granular insights.
All right, so we've covered getting your detailed cost data into Power BI. Now, let's step back a bit and talk about some fundamental cost optimization principles from the well-architected framework. One thing it talks about is measuring the total cost of ownership, or TCO. What does that actually mean beyond just the monthly Azure bill?
Yeah, TCO is about looking at the big picture. So it's not just your Azure bill, it's everything. So, the initial costs of setting up your infrastructure, your ongoing operating costs, things like training your team to effectively manage it, even costs associated with any changes you make to your processes as you adopt the cloud. It's about having a full understanding of all the expenses related to your cloud environment.
And why is it important to constantly evaluate your return on investment, or ROI, in the context of those cloud costs?
Because at the end of the day, your cloud investments need to deliver tangible value to your business, right? By focusing on ROI, you make sure that what you're using, the services you're using, are actually contributing to your goals in a cost-effective way. It keeps you from overspending on things that might be cool tech, but don't provide a good return.
So it's about making smart choices that deliver value. The framework also talks about establishing a baseline cost and then constantly refining those estimates. Why is this an ongoing process?
Well, it's all about being proactive and adapting, right? So you start with a baseline to understand your spending and pick the best billing models. But things change, your environment evolves, and you need to refine those estimates to forecast future spending and identify what's really driving your costs. And critically, you need to constantly be assessing if those drivers are still giving you the best value.
Makes sense. So once you understand your costs, the next step is to strategically decide which services to prioritize. What should be the main drivers behind those prioritization decisions from a cost perspective?
So the number one goal should be to prioritize services that can lower your overall cost without sacrificing the functionality or performance of your critical workloads, right? So look for opportunities to use more cost-effective tiers of services, explore dynamic scaling options, and see if managed services can reduce your operational overhead. And always remember to keep your business requirements and your desired ROI at the forefront of these decisions.
Yeah, it's all about finding that balance. And to keep things in check, the framework talks about designing your architecture with cost guardrails. How do you actually implement those?
There are a few ways to do it. You can use governance policies in Azure to restrict the types and sizes of resources that can be provisioned. You can set spending limits and quotas at various levels. You can even bake cost-conscious design patterns into your applications, like using serverless for event-driven workloads. The idea is to build these preventative measures into your environment to avoid any nasty surprises in your bill.
So it's like setting up fences to keep your spending within certain boundaries. The framework also touches on an interesting trade-off, reserving budget for potential SLA penalties versus investing more in a really solid implementation. What do you think is the smarter long-term strategy there?
It's pretty much always more cost-effective to invest in a robust, well-engineered implementation up front. It might take a bit more effort initially, but a solid system will be much less likely to experience outages that result in SLA penalties.
So it's like preventative maintenance, right? It's better to prevent problems than to just budget for them. Now, the materials you shared also dive into specific cost optimization trade-offs. Starting with reduced resiliency, how can trying to be too cost-conscious actually end up hurting your application's reliability?
Oh, there are a bunch of ways. Under-provisioning, being too aggressive with your scaling limits, can leave you vulnerable when you hit peak demand. Packing too many resources together can lead to the noisy neighbor problem, where one resource impacts others sharing the same infrastructure. Eliminating redundancy, like removing load balancers, creates single points of failure. Choosing cheaper SKUs that might have lower SLAs is another trade-off. Even hard spending limits, while they might seem like a good idea, can backfire by preventing scaling when you need it. And skimping on reliability testing is like, well, driving without spare tire. You're just asking for trouble.
Right. So sacrificing resilience for short-term savings can cost you a lot more down the road. Now, how can trying to optimize costs sometimes actually make your environment more complex, which, ironically, can make things less reliable?
Sometimes the very act of optimizing for cost can introduce complexity. like using CDNs or shifting processing to edge devices, or implementing super sophisticated event-based scaling, or having a complex data lifecycle management policy with lots of different tiers. All these things can add more moving parts, which means more things can go wrong, and you need more specialized knowledge to keep things running smoothly.
So it's a balancing act. You don't want to overcomplicate things in the pursuit of saving a few bucks. And then there's reduced security, which is probably the most concerning trade-off. How can trying to save money end up compromising security in the cloud?
This is where being too cheap can really backfire. Removing encryption to save a few dollars, skipping on security testing, delaying security patches, these are all false economies that can lead to huge problems down the line. Data breaches, compliance violations, the damage to your reputation, the costs can be enormous. Security is not something to mess around with.
Absolutely. It's like saying you're going to save money by not locking your doors at night. Now, the framework also mentions reduced observability as a potential pitfall. Why is having good visibility into your environment so crucial, not just for performance, but also for managing costs?
Because you can't optimize what you can't see. If you don't have robust logging, monitoring, and alerting, you're basically flying blind. You won't be able to identify performance bottlenecks that are wasting resources. You'll struggle to diagnose and resolve issues quickly, which means more downtime. It's about having the insights you need to find and address inefficiencies and make informed decisions.
Right. So it's like driving without a speedometer. You just don't know how fast you're going, or if you're even headed in the right direction. And finally, there's deferred maintenance. What are the hidden costs of putting off necessary maintenance tasks to save money in the short term?
Think of it like neglecting your car's maintenance. Sure, you might save some money now by skipping oil changes or tire rotations, but in the long run, you're setting yourself up for bigger problems and potentially much higher costs. You might miss out on performance improvements or cost optimizations that come with software updates. And of course, delaying security patches is just inviting trouble. It's about being proactive and investing in the long-term health of your environment.
It all comes back to that preventative maintenance idea, doesn't it? Okay, so it's very clear that cost optimization isn't about just cutting costs. It's about making smart decisions across the board and understanding the potential impact of those decisions. The cost optimization.pdf document you shared really highlights this holistic view. It talks about the benefits of a pay-as-you-go strategy. What are the key advantages of that model?
Pay-as-you-go is all about flexibility and avoiding those big upfront costs. You only pay for what you use, which is great for workloads with fluctuating demand. But, as we've discussed, you need good visibility and control over that usage to really take advantage of the cost benefits.
Right? It's about having that control and awareness. The overview also stresses the importance of understanding trade-offs, evaluating that first mover versus fast follower approach, and aligning your architecture with your business requirements. Why are those so important for cost management?
Trade-offs are everywhere, especially when you're optimizing for cost. Like we've seen, what saves you money in one area might cause problems in another. The first mover versus fast follower question is about weighing the potential benefits of adopting new tech early against the risks and maybe the higher costs. And aligning your architecture with your business needs is crucial. It makes sure that your tech investments are really supporting your goals, which is the ultimate measure of their effectiveness, including their cost effectiveness.
It's about making sure everything is working together towards a common goal. The overview also lists some common objectives that organizations have when they're moving to the cloud, like leveraging intelligent security features, using global regions, ensuring high resiliency, having on-demand scaling, consolidating their infrastructure, reducing costs, improving performance, and meeting compliance requirements. It seems like optimizing for cost is often connected to achieving these other goals, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times when you're optimizing for one goal, you'll see a positive impact in other areas, including cost. For example, on-demand scaling not only helps your applications handle changes in demand, but also means you're not paying for resources you don't need. And consolidating your on-premises infrastructure in the cloud can save you a lot of money on hardware and electricity. It's all about finding those win-win scenarios.
Right, it's like a virtuous cycle. Okay, let's talk about the cost implications of your landing zone in Azure. The document mentions the importance of choosing the right geographic region. Why does that matter so much for costs?
The region you choose can affect costs in a few key ways. Data transfer between regions costs money, so keeping resources that talk to each other a lot in the same region can save you some dough. Also, network ingress and egress charges vary by region, and the prices of the Azure services themselves, like VMs and storage, can be different in different regions. You also need to consider which services are available in which regions, and if your application needs high availability and redundancy, you might need to deploy across multiple regions, which will obviously increase your costs.
It's not just about picking a spot on the Mac, there's a lot to consider. Security in the cloud is also crucial, but the document acknowledges that security controls can often add to your costs. Can you give some examples of security measures that can increase cloud spending? And how do you balance that with your budget?
Sure, so dedicated security services like Azure Security Center Standard or Azure Sentinel, those come with cost. Specialized hardware security modules can also add to your expenses. And meeting compliance certifications often requires extra security measures and audits, which cost money. But compromising security to save a few bucks is just not worth it. You need to find the right balance, and you can do that by leveraging the built-in security features that Azure already provides, following best practices, and regularly reviewing and optimizing your security configuration to meet your specific needs without overspending.
So it's about being strategic with your security investments. The document also points out that the lifespan of your applications impacts the most effective cost optimization strategies. How do you approach things differently for long-term versus short-term applications?
For applications that you expect to run for a while, like core business applications, Azure reservations and savings plans can be a huge help. You can get big discounts, often up to 72% on compute cost, by committing to a 1-year or 3-year term. For apps with unpredictable usage, like batch processing jobs or dev test environments, you might be better off with consumption-based billing, like the Azure Functions Consumption Plan, where you only pay for what you actually use.
And what about applications that have predictable downtimes, like overnight or on weekends? Are there ways to save money during those off-peak hours?
You can definitely use automation to your advantage here. You can schedule your resources to shut down or scale down when they're not needed, and then power them back up when demand picks up again. You can use Azure Automation, Logic apps, or even custom scripts to do this. It's a great way to avoid paying for idle capacity.
So it's like setting your lights on a timer so you're not wasting electricity when you don't need them. Now, multi-regional and multi-zonal deployments are important for high availability and disaster recovery, but what are the cost implications of deploying across multiple regions or zones?
The main cost implication is data transfer charges. When data moves between regions, you typically pay for that. Some global services, like Azure Active Directory, don't usually have these charges, but you need to carefully analyze your application's network traffic patterns. Keep in mind that deploying across multiple regions for disaster recovery means duplicating resources, which adds to your costs. You have to weigh the cost of that resilience against your business needs for uptime and data protection.
So it's a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, let's talk about some of the cost-complete mechanisms built into Azure. First up, resource certs. How can they help you manage costs?
Resource groups are a way to organize your Azure resources. By grouping them logically, you can track costs more easily, allocate them to specific projects or departments, and apply policies and budgets at the right level.
So it's about bringing order to your cloud environment. Now, Azure has built-in roles for managing access to resources. How does that tie into cost management?
By assigning roles based on the principle of least privilege, you make sure that only the people who need to manage resources can actually do so. This helps prevent accidental or unauthorized spending.
So it's like having different levels of security clearance for your cloud resources. Then there are limits and quotas. How do those help prevent overspending?
Limits and quotas act like guardrails. They set boundaries on how much of a resource you can provision. So, for example, you might set a quota on the number of virtual machine cores you can deploy. This helps prevent people from spinning up way more resources than you planned for.
And finally, we have resource tagging. Why is it so important to enforce tagging, not just encourage it?
Tagging your resources with metadata like owner, application, or environment is really important for tracking and reporting on costs. But if people aren't tagging consistently, your data becomes unreliable. Enforcing tagging through Azure policy ensures that all new resources are tagged properly. This gives you much better visibility into your spending and helps you find optimization opportunities.
So it's about making sure everyone is playing by the same rules. Now, when you're trying to estimate your cloud costs, what are some key factors to consider, and are there any tools that can help?
There are quite a few factors that play a role. The specific resource ease you choose, the size of your virtual machines, the type of storage you select, potential networking costs, and even a comparison of your on-premises costs to your potential cloud costs. Thankfully, Microsoft provides some great tools to help with this. You can use the Azure Pricing Calculator to play around with different configurations and see how the costs change. And Azure Migrate can help you estimate the cost of moving your on-premises workloads to the cloud.
So it's about doing your homework and taking advantage of the resources available to you. The document also mentions that using PaaS, or Platform as a Service, offerings can often be more cost-effective than traditional IaaS, or Infrastructure as a Service. Why is that?
PaaS services, like Azure App Service or Azure SQL Database, take care of a lot of the underlying infrastructure management tasks for you, like patching, scaling, and operating system maintenance. This means you can save money on personnel costs and focus on building your applications instead of managing servers. PaaS services often come with built-in scalability and pay-as-you-go pricing, which can be much more cost-efficient for a lot of workloads.
So it's about letting Azure handle some of the heavy lifting for you. Now, when you're actually provisioning your cloud resources, are there any strategies you can use from the get-go to optimize for cost? The document mentions the Azure pricing calculator again, this time for services like AML, big data, compute, networking, and data stores. What are you looking at when you use that calculator?
You're looking for the best deal, essentially. You're comparing different VM sizes, storage tiers, networking options, and pricing models to find the most cost-effective configuration that still meets your performance and capacity needs. It's about being smart with your choices from the start.
So it's like shopping around for the best deal on a new car. You want to get the most bang for your buck. Now, once your resources are up and running, how do you proactively manage your costs? Azure Cost Management seems to be the key here. What are some of the features you should definitely be using?
Azure Cost Management is your command center for cost optimization. You can set budgets with customizable scopes and set up alerts that notify you when you're approaching those budget limits. You can monitor your resource consumption in real time and tune your resources accordingly. You can even set up budget automation to automatically scale down or shut down resources when certain thresholds are met. And it's really important to have regular cost reviews with your team to identify any surprises, understand your spending patterns, and find new optimization opportunities.
So it's not a set it and forget it thing. It's an ongoing process. Now, what about revising your budgets based on your actual spending patterns? How often should you be doing that?
Your initial budgets are often based on estimates, but once you start using Azure, you get real-world data about how much you're actually spending. It's crucial to review this data regularly, maybe even monthly in the beginning, and adjust your budgets accordingly. If you're constantly overspending in one area or underspending in another, you need to refine your budgets to make them more accurate and effective.
So it's about being flexible and adapting to your actual usage. The document also provides a checklist of specific actions you can take to optimize costs. Can you give us a few of the most important ones?
Absolutely. Right-sizing your VMs is one of the most impactful things you can do. Make sure your VMs are the right size for the workload they're running. You should also choose the most cost-effective storage tiers based on how often you access your data. For workloads that can handle interruptions, Azure Spot VMs can save you a lot of money. Optimize your data transfer by deploying resources in the same region whenever possible. Utilize CDNs and caching to reduce bandwidth costs. And embrace managed PaaS and SaaS services whenever it makes sense. They can save you a lot of time and money in the long run.
So lots of practical steps to take. We talked about trade-offs earlier. The checklist also reminds us to be aware of potential trade-offs between cost optimization and other things like reliability, performance, and security. Can you remind us of some of those key considerations?
Sure. When you're optimizing for cost, you always need to consider the potential impact on other areas. For example, choosing a cheaper storage option might save you money, but it could also increase the risk of data loss. Selecting a smaller VM might save you on compute costs, but it could also create performance bottlenecks. And as we discussed, skimping on security is never a good idea. It's about finding the right balance that meets your business needs across all these areas.
Right, you don't want to create new problems while you're trying to solve others. Now, Azure Advisor can also help with cost optimization by providing recommendations. The document specifically mentions a recommendation for Azure VMware Solution reserved instances. What's the benefit of using those?
Azure Advisor is constantly analyzing your Azure environment and looking for ways to optimize things. The Azure VMware Solution Reserved Instance recommendation basically tells you that if you buy your Azure VMware Solution usage up front for a 1-year or 3-year term, you can get a significant discount compared to paying on-demand prices. This benefit applies automatically to both your existing deployments and any new ones that match the reservation. You can even get bigger discounts by using shared scope recommendations, which let you pool your reservations across multiple subscriptions.
So it's like getting a bulk discount on your Azure VMware Solution usage. Finally, we have the design review checklist for cost optimization, which has a ton of recommendations from CO.01 to CO.14. It's a very thorough document. Can you give us a high-level overview of the key themes and advice it provides?
The checklist is like a blueprint for building and running cost-optimized solutions in Azure. It covers everything from fostering a culture of financial responsibility within your organization to creating a detailed cost model, collecting and reviewing cost data, implementing spending guardrails, getting the best rates from Microsoft, optimizing the costs of different components and environments, and even optimizing your code and data flows. It's really comprehensive and provides guidance for every stage of your cloud journey.
So it's like a Bible for cost optimization in Azure. The document also touches on a few other ways to optimize your cloud investment, like enterprise agreements and the CSP program. How do those impact costs?
Enterprise agreements often come with Azure prepayment options, which can get you lower pricing. They also provide tools for managing your cloud spending across your organization. The CSP program lets you work with a Microsoft partner who can manage your Azure subscriptions and often provide bundled services and customized pricing, which can lead to cost savings depending on your needs and the partner you choose.
And we mentioned Azure Migrate earlier. Besides estimating migration costs, how else can it help you optimize your cloud investment?
Azure Migrate gives you a lot of insight into your on-premises workloads, including how much of your resources you're actually using. This helps you make smart decisions about right-sizing your VMs when you move to Azure. It also provides recommendations for optimizing your workloads for the cloud. So it helps you plan a smooth and cost-effective migration.
So it's like having a moving consultant who helps you pack your stuff efficiently and make sure you don't bring anything you don't need to your new home. The document also recommends using separate dev test subscriptions to take advantage of reduced pricing for non-production environments. That seems like a no-brainer for saving money. And we talked about enforcing tagging earlier. Why is that so important?
Enforcing tagging is crucial for accurate cost reporting and allocation. It makes sure that all your resources are consistently labeled, which makes it much easier to track your spending and see where your money's going. Without enforcement, tagging can be spotty, and your cost data won't be as reliable.
It's like making sure everyone labels their food in the shared fridge. Okay, let's talk about aligning your billing and usage patterns to optimize costs. What are some recommendations there?
It's all about understanding how Azure services are billed, and then adjusting your configurations and usage to fit those billing increments as efficiently as possible. This might mean choosing a different VM size, tweaking your data retention policies, or adjusting your auto-scaling rules. The key is to find those sweet spots where you're getting the most value for your money without sacrificing performance or functionality. Azure provides tools like the pricing calculator and your detailed bill to help you understand these billing factors and your usage patterns.
So it's like becoming a savvy shopper and understanding the unit pricing at the grocery store. What are some best practices for collecting and reviewing your Azure cost data?
You need to generate detailed cost reports regularly, track trends, forecast future spending, and analyze any variances. Assigning resource owners creates accountability, and it's really important to have regular cost reviews with your stakeholders to discuss these reports. Spot